Hello, this is Professor James Strickler, and this is Political Science 1101, American Government. This is part of Unit 1, Theories of Government, and this is Lesson 8, Rule of the Many. In this lesson, you'll learn the meaning of democracy. You'll learn some examples of democracy. You'll learn the problem of impracticality in democracy, the problem of inefficiency in democracy, the problem of mob rule in democracy, and the problem of demagogues. Now, all this must be considered in the context of Aristotle's types of government that we've been discussing for a few lessons now. Aristotle theorized that you could have rule of a single person, such as a monarch or a tyrant, rule by a few people, such as aristocracy or oligarchy, or rule by the many, what he referred to as democracy. Now, as we consider the possibility of rule by the many, we have to ask ourselves, as we asked about the other forms of government, is this a good idea? Well, most Americans might instinctively say, yeah, of course democracy is a good idea, because they think of themselves as living under a democracy. But if you understand the way Aristotle used the term democracy, perhaps then you'll realize why he considered it to be a bad, if not the worst, form of government. And he wasn't the only one. The founding fathers of the United States of America, if you had asked them if they were creating a democracy, they would have said, no, there's no way, because they also considered it to be a bad form of government. Well, now wait a minute, but our country is, in many people's view, a democracy. The reason they say that, even though it's considered to be a bad thing, is they, again, don't understand how the term should be properly used. So let's look at that proper use as it was used by Aristotle. In ancient Greece, democracy meant the thing that we today now sloppily call direct or pure democracy, a situation in which all the citizens are actually part of the government. So in the United States of America today, that would mean that all the citizens, with 300 million people in America today, how many citizens are there? Maybe 200 million or more, not even counting the children that would be underage to participate. We're talking about all of them, not just electing government, but actually being part of the government that is ruling the country. So it's a very different concept than what we speak of sloppily today as democracy. For Aristotle, it meant that every citizen was part of the government. Now, do we see this kind of democracy, as Aristotle referred to it, actually practiced still today? We do, because the place that it was practiced was in town meetings, where all the citizens of the town would get together to make decisions for the town. Now, when I say all the citizens, again, we're excluding children, but we're also excluding, in ancient Greece, women and slaves. They had lots of slaves too. So in a really big city of the time, say Athens, which 10,000 people, by the time we didn't include the women, half of the population's gone. By the time we don't include the children, another maybe half or third of the population is gone. By the time we don't include the slaves, another big chunk of the population is gone, and we're down to 1,000 or 2,000 people out of those 10,000 that actually participate in the government. But that's still a lot of people to have participate in the government. They would hold their government meetings in big outdoor amphitheaters or sports arenas, where all these hundreds of people that want to participate could be in there together. Well, does this actually still happen today? Yes. Pure democracy is still practiced here in the United States of America in New England town meetings. There's a tradition in New England of some of these small towns. And when I say small towns, I mean really small towns, like 100 or 50 residents of the entire town. There's a tradition of them governing their town in these meetings that they held occasionally, once or twice a year, where they get together and in a high school auditorium or something like that. I shouldn't even say high school. Maybe there isn't only a middle school there or an elementary school in their little town. Anyway, they get together in some public space All the 50 or 100 residents of the town then hold a meeting and they make decisions for the government of that town. They decide what potholes to finish, when the garbage pickup will be, whatever it is. They work it out with all of them participating as part of the government. Well, if that's what democracy really is, maybe you can begin to see some of the problems that come up with trying to have a democracy. The first problem is it's simply impractical beyond a small community. What in ancient Greece they referred to as city-states. Because they were trying to practice democracy, but it couldn't be applied to a large area, their countries had to be very small. Each of them was the size of a city. Yes, now there were many Greek cities that they were ethnically related to each other, but they were separate, tiny little countries because it was simply impractical to make them bigger with everyone part of the government. It's hard enough to have a meeting going with 100 people, much less with thousands of people in that meeting coming from many, many places. So democracy, as Aristotle understood it, only really works with small states. Another problem with it is that it's inefficient. When you have these large groups of people meeting together, each of them just as powerful as the other person in the meeting sitting next to them, it's really hard to get them to agree on things. The result can be endless debate, difficult decision making, and the entire thing is just very inefficient. An additional problem with democracy is that it can become mob rule. Matter of fact, if you'd asked the founding fathers about the big problem with democracy, this might be their number one concern. When they thought of democracy, this is what they thought of. Well, what do we mean by mob rule? What comes to mind if I tell you there's a mob waiting outside your house? You picture angry, passionate people that are upset about something, perhaps ignorant, don't understand, but they're just inflamed in some way and want something done. And they try to use that power of their numbers and their passions to force things to change the way they want. Well, that is how many people, both ancient and modern, have visualized what real democracy is. It's just an angry mob using the government to do what they want. They get excited and upset, and then they force a law through, and in the end, the law ends up being a bad idea that punishes the minority, messes things up, because they aren't being careful and considerate. They're just getting each other worked up. Which then can lead to the last problem with democracy, and that is that it's susceptible to demagogues. Now, what do I mean by a demagogue? I mean a person who comes along and sees the problems with democracy, such as the mob rule, where they've got all these people that are angry, they want something done, but they can't get it done because of the inefficiencies of the system. And so what the demagogue does is he appeals to the masses' anger and their fear in order to seize power for himself. He tells them, yes, 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 I understand your concerns. I can see why you're angry, but you're not getting things done, but I will for you. Just give me the power. Now, I have a picture of presidential candidate Donald Trump here as I talk about this. And please don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying that Donald Trump is an evil man who's going to be a dictator if he becomes in charge or anything like that. The point I want to make is that the methods of Donald Trump's campaigning are classic demagoguery. He gives speeches to incite anger and resentment, and in that way he gets the people to get on his side, and he hopes vote for him, and in that way he will gain personal power. This is the classic path of a demagogue to gaining power, and it's one that's been used throughout history. I'll give you a couple real-world examples of demagogues who used the failures of democracy to seize power. One is the French general Napoleon. France experimented with the idea of a democratic government. They overthrew their king, they chopped off his head, they tried to organize a new government, but they had difficulty figuring out how to govern themselves. It became troubled, it became inefficient, it became radical. And as these problems brewed and got worse and worse, they started chopping off more and more people's heads. And then finally, in the midst of all this upheaval, Napoleon came along and said, hey, you got yourself in a big mess. I'll get you out of it. Just give me the power. They did, and Napoleon made himself emperor. Hitler, oftentimes considered the worst man to live in the past 100 years, gained power by appealing to the people and actually getting voted into office. Now let's review what we learned in this lesson. First of all, as Aristotle used the term, what is democracy? Does it mean that the citizens are sovereign? Does it mean that the citizens elect the government? Does it mean the citizens are the government? Or does it mean that citizens propose the laws? Well, while it could potentially mean other things, such as citizens are sovereign or citizens propose laws, what it most directly means, again, we're always looking for the best answers, is that the citizens are the government themselves. Well, are there modern examples of this kind of government where the citizens are the government? Well, if there are they congressional elections, presidential elections, New England town meetings, or city council meetings? Now, it could be possible to confuse city council meetings, but again, I shouldn't say again, but instead, city council meetings are representative government. They're elected to be in that position. They are not the citizens themselves going and being the government. Instead, we see that in places like New England town meetings. And that is the correct answer. So why is democracy impractical? That's one of the points we made, that it's impractical. Is it because the meetings can only be so big? Because people don't like participating in meetings? Because it's too long between meetings? Or too many meetings are needed? It's impractical because meetings can only get so big. You cannot have everyone who is a citizen participating in the government unless you have a very small group. Democracy is also inefficient. But why? Is it that the meetings are too short? Voters are uninformed? Or there's too little interest in politics? Or that there are too many decision makers? The problem is, with everyone participating as an actual part of the government, there are too many decision makers, too many opinions, too difficult to get everyone to agree on something because they have such wildly different ideas, and each of them is just as powerful in that meeting as the person next to them. What is mob rule, which democracy is often compared to? Is it an angry, ignorant majority? Is it organized criminal rules? Or should I say, organized criminals rule? Is it a very large Congress? Or too many things to get done? An angry, ignorant majority is the correct answer. That's what we think of as a mob. Now, the reason we add majority there is because we're discussing this in the context of democracy. This is where the people who don't really understand and can wisely resolve the problem get actual control of the government and have it do some things that in the end we would consider to be just counterproductive at best. And finally, what is a demagogue? Is a demagogue an elected official? Is a demagogue someone who uses the public spheres to get power? Is a demagogue simply the majority's leader? Or is a demagogue a representative of the weak? The right answer, of course, is that a demagogue is someone who uses the public sphere to gain power for themselves. Okay, that does it for this Lesson 8. Next, we'll have Unit 1, Lesson 9, about the American solution to the problems of democracy.